Most people read to feel smart, not to become smart. There is a difference, and it is the difference between everything. The average reader finishes a book and walks away with a vague, warm sense of having done something virtuous. They followed a plot, they liked a character, they were moved by a scene, and they closed the cover and returned to exactly the same person they were before they opened it. Nothing was challenged, nothing was broken, nothing was rebuilt. The book passed through them like water through a net. This is not reading. This is consumption dressed in intellectual clothing. Here is what they will not tell you in any school, any reading list, any bestseller ranking. The books that actually change how your brain operates are not comfortable. They are not easy. They will not confirm what you already believe. They will not make you feel good about yourself. They will make you feel at various points confused, disturbed, disoriented, and fundamentally uncertain about things you thought you understood. And they will do this not because they are difficult for the sake of being difficult, but because genuine thinking is uncomfortable, and any book that does not produce discomfort is not making you think, it is making you feel. There is nothing wrong with feeling, but do not mistake it for thinking. Psychologists have a name for the mechanism that keeps most people in the warm shallows of comfortable reading. They call it epistemic laziness. The mind's deep structural preference for information that confirms what it already believes, for complexity that resolves quickly, for challenges that do not actually require it to revise its understanding of anything fundamental. The mind is not lazy about pleasure. It is lazy about the specific, effortful, uncomfortable work of genuinely updating what it thinks is true. Most books are designed to accommodate this laziness. They are engineered for it. They give you just enough complexity to feel sophisticated, just enough resolution to feel satisfied, and they send you back to your life having disturbed precisely nothing. The books on this list are not those books. These are 10 books chosen for a single, merciless criterion. They will make you think in ways you are not currently thinking, not bigger thoughts, different thoughts, thoughts that come from structural shifts in how your mind processes the world, not just additions to the pile of information you already carry. Some of them you will find hard to finish. Some of them you will find hard to start again after you put them down. Some of them will sit with you for years before you understand what they actually did to you. That is the point. That is how you know they worked. Before we get to the books, you need to understand what you are up against. Epistemic laziness is not a character flaw. It is not a sign that you are unintelligent or intellectually incurious. It is the default operating mode of the human mind, and it exists for excellent evolutionary reasons. The brain's primary job is to keep you alive and functioning. A brain that is continuously revising its fundamental assumptions about reality is a brain that cannot make quick decisions, cannot act on instinct, cannot rely on the accumulated experience that tells you how the world generally works. Some degree of cognitive conservatism, the tendency to stick with what has already proved useful, is not a failure, it is a feature. The problem arrives when epistemic laziness migrates from the practical to the intellectual, when it colonizes the way you engage with ideas, with other people's minds, with the accumulated wisdom of people who have thought harder about specific things than you have. When it turns reading from a genuinely transformative encounter with another consciousness into a confirmation exercise, a tour through the familiar in different clothes. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying two different modes of thinking. The first is fast, intuitive, effortless, reliant on pattern recognition and shortcut. The second is slow, deliberate, effortful, genuinely analytical. And his core finding is one that literature understood centuries before psychology arrived to name it. Most people spend most of their lives in the first mode while believing they are operating in the second. They mistake fluency for understanding. They mistake recognition for knowledge. They read a complex argument, follow the syntax, recognize the vocabulary, and conclude that they have understood it, when what they have actually done is mapped it onto structures they already possess and called the fit comprehension. The books on this list force you into the second mode. Not by being obscure or pretentious, by being so precisely uncomfortably true about things you thought you understood that you cannot engage with them on autopilot. They will not let you coast. They will not confirm your existing map. They will hand you a new map and ask you with no apology to navigate by it. 10 books. Different centuries, different countries, different forms. One common function, they will make you smarter in the specific, difficult, uncomfortable way that matters, not the way that feels like smartness, the way that actually is it. The first wall that epistemic laziness builds is the assumption that you understand your own existence, that you know what it means to think, to feel, to exist as a conscious being in the world. The first 3 books on this list exist to demolish that assumption with precision and without mercy. The first is Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, published in 1938, a novel in the form of a diary kept by a historian named Antoine Roquentin, who, over the course of several weeks in a grey French port town, begins to experience existence itself as physically repulsive. Not his life, not his circumstances, existence. The sheer, unordered, meaningless, overabundant fact of things being rather than not being. A pebble on a beach becomes intolerable. The root of a chestnut tree fills him with a horror he cannot name. The world keeps existing at him and the sensation is nausea. Most readers encounter this book as a philosophy lesson. They look for the argument, find existentialism, take notes, and move on. This is the wrong approach. Nausea is not a philosophy lesson, it is a phenomenological attack. Sartre is not explaining existentialism, he is making you feel what it would be like to have the false bottom of meaning drop out of the world. The horror of the book is not abstract, it is somatic. Roquentin does not argue that existence precedes essence, he experiences it in his body, and if you let the book do its work, you will experience it too, briefly, vertiginously, before your mind snaps the familiar scaffolding back into place. What it breaks is the comfortable assumption that meaning is a feature of the world rather than something the human mind imposes on it. That the categories you use to organize reality, purpose, narrative, progress, significance, are not discoveries, but inventions, and fragile ones. Most people move through their entire lives without this particular ground shifting beneath them. Sartre shifts it in 200 pages. The second book is The Passion According to G.H. by Clarice Lispector, Brazilian, published in 1964. A wealthy sculptor named G.H. goes to clean out her maid's room and finds a cockroach in the wardrobe, and in the encounter with the cockroach, the entire architecture of her identity and her understanding of reality collapses. This summary makes the book sound absurd. The book is not absurd. The book is one of the most precise records of genuine consciousness confronting what it does not know about itself, ever committed to paper. Lispector writes in a prose that operates below the level of conventional thought. She is not describing thought. She is enacting the movement of a mind encountering something it cannot assimilate. G.H. does not process the cockroach. She cannot. The cockroach is somehow outside every category she has for the world, and in being outside her categories, it reveals the categories to her for the first time. The scaffolding becomes visible only when something refuses to stand on it. What this book breaks is the assumption that language and thought are the same thing, that the words you have for an experience fully capture it, that the maps you use to navigate the world are the territory rather than approximations of it. Lispector is doing something that very few writers have ever done successfully. She is putting on the page the texture of consciousness at the point where it meets what it cannot accommodate. The third book is Hunger by Knut Hamsun, Norwegian, published in 1890. A writer in Christiania, late 19th century Oslo, is starving. Not metaphorically, he has no money, no food, no stable shelter, and he refuses, with a pride that is pathological and inexplicable and completely recognizable, to compromise his dignity in ways that would relieve his situation. He lies, he fantasizes, he hallucinates, he maintains an interior monologue of extraordinary creativity and self-deception while his body degrades around the edges of his consciousness. Hunger invented something. It invented the modernist interior voice, the torrential, unreliable, self-contradicting stream of consciousness that Joyce and Woolf and Faulkner would later build their reputations on. But Hamsun did it first, and he did it without the literary establishment having a frame for it, which means the book arrives at you with a rawness that later modernism sometimes loses. The narrator is not a character you observe. He is a mind you inhabit, and the mind is not stable. And the experience of inhabiting it is genuinely disorienting in a way that will change how you think about interiority, about the gap between how people present and what they are, about the stories people tell themselves in real time to survive circumstances that should, by any rational accounting, break them. The second wall that epistemic laziness builds is the assumption that you understand history, not dates and events. The deeper thing, why human beings in different times and places did what they did, and what that tells you about what human beings in your time and place are doing right now. The next three books break this wall. The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, Soviet Russia, written in the 1930s, published posthumously in 1967 after decades of suppression. Satan visits Moscow. He arrives in the form of a mysterious foreign professor named Wooland, accompanied by a giant talking cat who drinks vodka and shoots people, a naked witch, and a hitman in a checkered suit. He proceeds to destroy the comfortable, ideologically correct lives of the Moscow literary establishment with a series of increasingly savage practical jokes. In a parallel narrative set in ancient Jerusalem, Pontius Pilate agonizes over his decision regarding a philosopher named Yeshua. This description makes the book sound like magical realism with a political edge. It is that, and it is also a sustained philosophical interrogation of what happens to truth in a society that has decided official truth is the only kind. Every character who encounters Wooland is destroyed, not by his malice, but by their own cowardice, by the gap between what they know and what they are willing to say, between what they believe and what they will publicly perform believing. Bulgakov watched the Soviet system devour human integrity in real time, and he understood something that every political moment of managed truth needs to hear. It is not the lie that destroys you, it is the decision to stop being able to tell the difference. What this book breaks is epistemic comfort about living inside ideological systems. The assumption that you could see clearly if you were inside one, that the people who didn't see were weak or stupid or morally inferior, that you are different. You are not different. You are Bulgakov's Muscovites, and the things you are too comfortable to say out loud are your version of Soviet doublethink. Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo, Mexican, published in 1955, 68 pages. A man named Juan Preciado travels to the village of Comala to find his dead father and discovers the village is populated entirely by ghosts. The narrative fractures, time collapses, the dead speak, the living and the dead share narrative space without distinction. The father, Pedro Paramo, a cacique, a local tyrant, is reconstructed through fragments, other people's memories, confessions, accusations, and what assembles is a portrait of a specific kind of power and a specific kind of ruin. This book invented Latin American magical realism before Garcia Marquez codified it, and it does something that 100 Years of Solitude, for all its brilliance and scope, never quite achieves. It makes the supernatural feel like the only accurate language for certain kinds of historical experience. The ghosts in Comala are not metaphors. They are what happens to the people a man like Pedro Paramo leaves behind. They cannot die fully because their lives were never fully acknowledged. Their haunting is literal, and it is also the most precise account of historical trauma available in 68 pages. What this book breaks is the Western narrative assumption that time moves forward and causality is linear. Rulfo writes in a structure that mirrors how trauma actually functions in memory, though not chronologically, but associatively, returning to the same wounds from different angles, the past and present, bleeding through each other without clean partition. You will have to read it twice. The second reading is when you understand what the first reading was. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Published as a short story in 1959, expanded to a novel in 1966. Charlie Gordon has an IQ of 68. He undergoes an experimental surgery that dramatically amplifies his intelligence. He becomes, over the course of weeks, one of the most cognitively capable people on Earth. And then, as the surgery's effects prove unstable, he begins to regress. The novel is told in Charlie's progress reports, journal entries that chart the rise and fall of his intelligence through the changing quality of his syntax, vocabulary, and self-awareness. The formal device is what breaks you, because you watch in real time, through the medium of language, a man becoming more aware of his world and then losing that awareness. At his peak, Charlie can see everything. The condescension of the people who called him their friend when he was unable to understand. They were mocking him. The intellectual vanity of the scientists who treated him as an experiment rather than a person. The specific loneliness that comes with intelligence when it outpaces everyone around you. He sees all of it with a precision that is devastating. And then he begins to lose the ability to see it, and the prose degrades with the sight. What this book breaks is the assumption that intelligence is straightforwardly good, that more cognitive capacity means more capacity for human flourishing. Charlie, at his most intelligent, is the most isolated, the most aware of his own suffering, the most conscious of every dimension of what he is losing. And the question the book forces you to sit with is one that has no comfortable answer. Is it better to see clearly and suffer, or to see less and be spared? The third wall is perhaps the most important and the most difficult to break, the assumption that you understand other people, that you can, through empathy or intelligence or the ordinary social cognition you've spent your life developing, access what it is like to be someone else. The next 3 books exist to show you how limited and how presumptuous this assumption is. The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski, published in 1965. A young boy, never named, wanders through rural Eastern Europe during World War II, separated from his parents, surviving by moving from village to village. What happens to him in those villages is among the most brutal material in 20th century fiction. He witnesses and experiences violence that is not the cinematic violence of war narratives, but the banal, casual, inventive cruelty that ordinary people are capable of when the social structures that constrain them are removed. The book is controversial and has been controversial since publication for reasons that are worth understanding. Kosinski claimed it was autobiographical, and it probably was not in its specifics. But the question of whether the specific incidents happened is the wrong question. The question is whether the psychology it depicts is accurate, whether ordinary people, not soldiers, not ideologues, not the systematically dehumanized participants in industrial killing, are capable of the cruelties described. And the answer that history returns every time the question is asked is yes, unconditionally and repeatedly yes. This is not a comfortable truth, and the book does not present it comfortably. What it breaks is the protective narrative about evil as an aberration, the belief that what human beings do to each other under conditions of social collapse is an exception rather than a possibility that lives in every ordinary person until the circumstances are right to draw it out. The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, Portuguese. Written throughout the 1920s and 1930s, published posthumously in 1982, it is not, strictly speaking, a book. It is a collection of fragments, some a sentence long, some several pages, written by a Lisbon bookkeeper named Bernardo Soares, who is one of Pessoa's many heteronyms, his invented authors, each with their own biographies, philosophies, and styles. Soares works, eats, sleeps, and thinks. He does not travel. He does not have relationships of any depth. He observes his inner life with an attention so fine and so relentless that it becomes, paradoxically, a form of radical alienation from the world, and simultaneously the most intimate account of what it is like to be conscious that most readers will ever encounter. You do not read this book linearly. You open it anywhere, read until something stops you, and stay there. Pessoa writes sentences about the experience of consciousness, of being half awake, of the relationship between dream and perception, of the way time passes differently in the body than in the mind, with a precision that should not be possible. He describes things you have experienced and never had language for. He makes the interior life legible in a way that simultaneously makes it feel more mysterious. And because he does this without narrative, without plot, without the fictional conventions that normally allow you to keep a book at arm's length, there is nowhere to hide. The book will find the things in you that you have not yet found in yourself. What it breaks is the assumption that interiority is easy to communicate, that the ordinary transactions of language capture what is happening inside you with any real fidelity. Pessoa makes you aware of how much of your inner life you have never found words for, and how different the wordless thing is from any description of it. Correction by Thomas Bernhard, Austrian, published in 1975. A man named Reuthemer has spent decades designing and building a perfect cone-shaped structure in the forests of the Austrian countryside as a gift to his sister. The cone is the most precise possible expression of his understanding of his sister's nature. Before it is finished, she dies. Shortly after it is finished, he kills himself. The novel is narrated by a friend sorting through Reuthemer's papers, and the narration is rendered in Bernhard's signature style. Immense, rolling, obsessive sentences that double back on themselves, correct themselves, qualify themselves, and refuse to resolve. Bernhard is doing something formally radical that is also philosophically precise. The prose itself enacts the impossibility of the project it is describing. Every sentence attempts to say the true thing and then immediately corrects itself, because the true thing always exceeds what language can hold. The correction is not a failure of intelligence. It is the most honest possible response to the gap between what a mind can grasp and what words can carry. Reuthemer's project is the same project, the attempt to know another person so completely that you can build them the perfect thing. And the tragedy is not that he fails, the tragedy is that completion is death. The cone, finished, is perfect. His sister cannot survive the perfection, he cannot survive having achieved it. What this book breaks is the assumption that understanding is the same as connection. That knowing someone fully, even loving them with the total precision Reuthemer brings to his sister, is a form of intimacy rather than, in its extreme form, a form of violence. Here is the thing about epistemic laziness that makes it specifically acutely dangerous in the present moment. It has never been easier to feel intellectually stimulated without being intellectually challenged. The infrastructure of modern information consumption is built with extraordinary precision to deliver the sensation of engagement without the reality of it. You can spend 8 hours a day reading, scrolling, watching, listening, and processing more information than any human being in any previous century could have accessed, and end the day knowing less that is useful than you knew when you woke up. Not because the information is false, though some of it is, but because information without resistance is not thought. It is data passing through a system that processes it into confirmation. The specific damage epistemic laziness does is not that it makes you ignorant. It is that it makes you confidently ignorant. It fills you with the texture of knowledge, the vocabulary, the references, the sense of having engaged, without the substance. You will have opinions about everything and understanding of almost nothing. You will be fluent in the positions without having done the work that positions are supposed to be a shorthand for. And you will mistake this fluency for intelligence because the people around you are doing the same thing, and the fluency passes between you without friction, which is what fluency always does. The books on this list create friction. Deliberately, structurally, they cannot be consumed. They have to be encountered, which is a different and far more uncomfortable relationship. You cannot skim Lispector and take anything from her. You cannot process Bernhard's sentences without slowing to their pace. You cannot follow Rulfo's narrative without surrendering the expectation that narrative should be linear. The books ask something from you that most contemporary consumption does not ask, that you meet them at their level rather than waiting for them to descend to yours. This is not elitism, it is a demand for reciprocity. Every mind that produced these books worked at the edge of what it could do. The minimum the books require is that you work at the edge of what you can do, And what happens at that edge, the discomfort, the confusion, the slow and sometimes vertiginous restructuring of how you see something you thought you understood, is not a side effect of reading these books. It is the point of them. You will not finish all 10 of these books in a month. You should not try to. One of the symptoms of epistemic laziness is the desire to consume a reading list the way you would consume a playlist, moving efficiently from item to item, accumulating the having read without sitting in the having encountered. Resist this. Read one. Read it slowly. Read it again if it resists you the first time. Most of them will resist you the first time. That resistance is not the book being too difficult. It is the book working. There is a line in Nausea that Sartre buries halfway through in the middle of one of Roquentin's most vertiginous attacks. He writes, "I exist. It is soft, so slow, and light. It seems as though it suspends in the air. It moves." This is not a description of horror, it is a description of perception, stripped of its usual insulation, the world as it actually is, before the mind's habit of meaning has processed it into something navigable. And it is terrifying, not because it is unusual, but because it is what is always there, underneath the structures you have built to avoid noticing it. Most reading is insulation. Most books are designed to add another layer between you and the raw, unprocessed, slightly nauseating fact of consciousness in a world that does not organize itself around your comfort. These 10 books take the insulation off. Nausea will make you feel existence rather than think about it. Hunger will put you inside a mind at war with itself in ways you will recognize from the inside. The passion, according to GH, will find the place in you where language runs out. The Master and Margarita will show you your own ideological blindnesses wearing someone else's face. Pedro Paramo will dismantle linear time and reassemble it as something more honest. Flowers for Algernon will ask you whether consciousness is a gift or a wound. The Painted Bird will make you look without flinching at what ordinary people are capable of. The Book of Disquiet will make the inside of your head legible to you in ways it has never been. Correction will show you what total understanding costs, and somewhere in all 10 of them, if you let them work, something will shift. Not your knowledge, your mind. That is what curing your stupidity actually requires. Not more information, not bigger opinions, not a longer list of books you can say you have read. The specific, uncomfortable, irreversible experience of a thought you did not already have entering a mind that did not already know it, and finding that the mind, however reluctantly, cannot close back around it. And these books will not make you feel smart, they will make you think differently. There is no comparison between the two.